Hey guys, and welcome to another video. This video is going to be focusing on kind of how I do my art anatomy as far as like my mouse characters go. This has been a video that has been requested of me several times, and I have made it pretty clear in the past that I am really not that big of a fan of telling people how I do my anatomy, because I don't necessarily, it's not that I don't want them copying me, it's that everybody kind of comes to their own anatomical style over time through study, research, and things of that nature. I mean, some things don't change. You know, the head's going to be the head, the hand's going to be the hand, the fingers are going to be the fingers, the toes are going to be the toes. Unless you do some sort of weird creature sort of thing where all of that's mixed up, which is a completely different subject. So I don't like to give people the this is how I do it, so this is how you should do it spiel. There are basic things and basic rules you should follow as far as anatomy goes, but with art you tend to be allowed to bend a lot of rules, especially if you're going for more stylistic expectations and, you know, yada yada yada. Like for height, I mean, the average person, according to, I don't know, anatomy, is about 7 to 7.5 heads tall. But in cartooning, in animation, in comicking, you could see anybody from 2.5 heads tall, you know, head being the proportion of that character and their head height being stacked in order to determine the height of that character, to, you know, 4 or 5. I know Family Guy in particular tends to do about 3 heads tall, 3.5 heads tall. Simpsons tends to be about 4 to 3.5 as well, depending on if it's a child or an adult. And even that rule is bent. I mean, if you take a look at Marge, her head height, because they include the hair, is like completely off the wall. Point being, guys, you will come to your own style in time, but since this has been requested of me, I figured I would go ahead and take the time to show you guys. My anatomy style is a little bit different than, you know, some people's. It's not quite Disney, it's not quite anime, it's somewhere in between, but whatever. Alright, so first and foremost, the first thing I always start with is the head. Now, I start with the head because the head size is going to determine the rest of the height of the character. So if we start with the head size of the... Oh, you guys can't even see. Let me zoom in a little bit. Come on, zoom. Why don't you want to zoom? There we go. Now, if we start with a head size of, say, roughly this tall, and we're going to make this Piper just because I'm very familiar with her particular anatomy. Say this round. I had an eraser, but I don't know what I did with. Oh, here it is. It's underneath my keyboard. Like this, then we can sort of determine the rest of the body. So what I'll just kind of do is figure out what pose I want. So if this is just like a normal standing pose, what I'll kind of do is rough in the basic shapes. So I know that she needs a chest. She is female. So I round out the top of my bottom shape here, and then I taper the waist at the waist, and then I pop out those hips because she's female. Now here's the thing, and this was something that I was taught in art school, is you can start off with your anatomy with the torso because the arms work within the torso. So starting off with the torso has always been the best for me. Now what I like to do is I like to rough in the skull completely. Now, anatomically speaking, my characters are not correct, and I'll be the first to admit that, but it's a stylistic choice of mine. I know that some people use that as an excuse, but I'm very aware of how to draw a skull. But because I'm going for a more cartoony feel, I try to simplify the shapes. Plus, I'm adding a animal element to my characters. So I'll rough it in. Now, Piper in particular has a very prominent round cheek, and she has bigger eyes than the average bear. Not that she's a bear, she's a mouse. So I'll rough in the expressions real quick. But I do this because I can figure out where that jawbone is. Let me clean this up for you. And when I sketch, I'm very messy. You guys have probably seen that. So I get out where everything is. I like to determine where the nose is. I like to determine what the mouth is doing, because the mouth and the jaw interact. So if the mouth is open, then the jaw is going to be lower. I like to rough where the eyes are. They don't have to necessarily be in an expression yet, but I do this because I like to see right about where the jawline is going to be, because anatomically speaking, the back of your head, where your jaw is about where you should see the back of the neck. It usually comes back a little bit further on people, but when I do my characters, I tend to go with that because the ear takes up the back portion. And I'm not the only one who does this. There's a few other artists, but I like to make my necks a little bit thinner on my females. It sort of gives that feel of delicacy, and it sort of gives that feel of like just slenderness, whereas males tend to have very muscular backs and very muscular shoulders. Cherry being the exception because she's very muscular herself. I tend to like just to have a small divot here. Let me zoom in so you guys can see. I don't know which way my zooms are, I'm sorry. I tend to like to have a focus. Focus. Come on. There it goes. I like to have just a small divot. It's still not focusing. This is getting ridiculous. Right here. And I very, very rarely actually show the jawline. I tend to just leave it. But this is where the ear connects. She's a mouse, so her ear kind of comes from her jaw. It's just a stylistic choice, I've decided. And then the neck comes down here. I just like to have that set because the direction that your head's pointing, unless you're in some sort of very dynamic, sort of crazy off-the-wall pose, is typically the direction your body's going to be facing. It also shows me that, see, I've already kind of started getting a little off base here. So it allows me an opportunity to correct. So now I can bring that torso in where it's supposed to be. There we go. So you got your head. And some people can do it based off of that. I've always found that I have to sort of get the head in for it to work properly for me. Otherwise, I just end up having to adjust. I like to draw the collarbone as straight across. Typically, your clavicle does go straight across. If you're a bipedal creature, it goes straight across and it stops into, it goes into the shoulder, and then the arms start. But since we're not worried about the arms right this second, we're more worried about the body, I just kind of go with that. So for the legs and the hips, now this is kind of a trick I learned. I go with a shape. Some people will draw the legs completely together, and I get that. But for speed and just sort of for cohesiveness, I like to sketch out an overall shape, and then I can adjust it later. So Piper is thinner than the average bear, and I've always said that. But I like to kind of determine where her hips end. So like right here-ish. I mean, it's very rough. And then I pick a pose for her. Now she is very docile, very inward. So her legs tend to be together, whereas a person like Cherry stands in a very powerful motion, and her legs tend to be apart or aggressive or sort of like in movement. Piper tends to be very withheld, internalized, and things like that. So her positions tend to be very timid. So again, you have to kind of know your character too. Now everyone appreciates a good thigh gap, but it's not necessary because my girls are always in skirts. So I'll do that, and then I kind of rough out where I want her thighs, and then I rough out how I want her calves. And then for the feet, I don't get into too much detail. I just do simple triangles. Sorry, I have to keep moving because you guys can't see it if I'm too far away. So yeah, and that's it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4.5 heads is how tall Piper tends to be. Now when I do her as a chibi, she's about 2.5. So I'm taking away about 2 heads to sort of give to the illusion of chibiness. And so I just kind of rough it out from there. Now we all know we have knees, which are right here. And since this leg is in front, we have that illusion there of the leg disappearing behind. And then we can even show the other foot in the back. So, and this is another trick that you guys who are struggling with anatomy can sort of pick up on. Your legs are curved. All of anatomy is curved, and in illustration and in animation in particular, the idea is to simplify the human form, to simplify the form you're working on. And in order to do that, a lot of people work with straights and curves. So basically what that means is that if you've got a curved side, offset it with a straight side to create balance and to create that illusion of one side being curvier than the other. So in the case of Piper, if we curve the outside of her leg, we can make the inside a little bit straighter. We're not forcing a curve. And that kind of gives this illusion of shape. It kind of gives this dynamic illusion of shape, like like her body is expanding out, which is what typical bodies do. If you look at yourself in the mirror, you're nothing but primarily curves, not so many straights. If you're going for realistic, yeah, you're probably going to have curves on both sides, but for simplistic forms, for example, Total Drama Island really took that to an extreme. If you look at their legs, it's literally a straight line and then just curves. And that's their legs. That is an extreme, and it's one that works because it still maintains the illusion of shape to the legs. Now, I won't lie and say I don't use curves at all, because I do have a bit of a curve to the leg, but I always keep in mind that if I want to simplify it and move quickly, I could just make a straight line, and then 2 curves. I can always go back and refine later. So your calf always kind of goes out, and then your shin is always straight. Your shin bone on the inside, or as a bone, and it's close, very, very close to the surface. So it gives your leg an illusion of straightness, like boom. It is literally straight bone. And y'all, if you've ever like hit your shin bone on something, you know what I'm talking about. The leg straight on does have a flatter side than it does from, well, it does. Your leg tends to have a very straight side. I'm sorry, I'm muttering my words. I'm trying to keep this video short. But if you're looking at it straight forward, you do have an illusion. Say this is a realistic knee here. You do have a bit of muscle here, and then it straightens out, and then here you have a complete straight thing. So the leg itself, if it's muscular and healthy, has these illusions. I mean, there are people who have very skinny legs, don't get me wrong, but this right here is how a more realistic shin would look with the bone. But to keep things simple, I just kind of try to stick to straighter lines. Keep in mind that most of my girls are covered completely in skirts. So the fact that I even plan out their anatomy this far is amazing. And then I still will keep the feet as simple, just triangle shapes. I don't see the need to put in toes and things like that unless I intend to show bare feet. If I do, then I just keep that simple as well. We have a big toe, and I'll do a little round bump here, and then I just do like little round bumps all the way out. That's it. That's all you really need to do to make that definition of toes. There's no need to go into massive detail. I don't, but again, you guys do you. And then forearms, and then for the, or not forearms. I can't for some reason think of what this arm part is. And it's really bad because I should know my anatomy, but it's escaping me right now. Anyway, so for the forearms, here again is another example where you can do an extreme. You could do an arm like this or an arm like this, depending on the style you're going for. Those are just options. But I just tend to do, again, rounder shapes. So what I'll do is round it out like this, and I do sort of like a teardrop shape, an upside down teardrop. And then the hands, of course, are the hands. Hands are something I just can't explain to you guys. That's just something you got to learn with practice and observation. Hands themselves are very tricky, and I still don't do it right. So that's the one thing I really don't feel comfortable explaining to people, is how to do hands. But that's basically it. Now, if I want to get into more detail, say I want to define the breasts and stuff like that, I would draw this out more. But for now, this is about as complex as I will get with Piper in particular, because she tends to be one of my characters that's very covered up. So there's no need to go into further detail. So from here, now that I have her completely roughed out, let me see if I can zoom out. I can, cool. Now that I have her completely roughed out, you guys get a really good idea of her actual height in correlation to her skull. So like I said, it's about, do it over here, about 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe about 5. I might have overshot here a little bit. Oh, that's a little bit high. 1, 2, oh my god, I can't do it. All right, let me do it this way. 1, 2, 3, yeah, it's still about 4, 4.5. And then from there on, you can put in the details. Of course, you know, the hair. The hair is just the hair, guys. I don't really think I need to go too into detail with that as far as it goes. But then from here, this is where you can start having your fun, putting in your details and really getting to bring the character to life, bringing out their quirks and things like that. I'm used to working so much faster than this. Having to slow down and explain it is actually quite a challenge. And then, of course, you know, you can start putting the clothes. Now that you have your basic shape, you know how the clothes are going to fit. So her clothes, she tends to have puffy sleeves and then form-fitting here. So knowing where that that upper arm is, there we go, is really important, because then you can form around that. She also wears an apron. So knowing where that taper in the waist is really helps, because then I could just sort of work around that. And of course, she has her skirt, which again, if I was doing a drawing, it would basically be covering up her legs. So we can formulate that. But say her knee was bent, you would need to know where that knee is bent in order to make the folds in her skirt more realistic, so it would fit with the form of the body underneath the skirt. One of the things that my art teachers in high school used to always try to argue with me was to tell me that I needed to draw the forms out underneath the clothing. And I used to fight against that. But I wish I had listened sooner, because it does bring a lot more life to the fabric you're drawing if you do draw the form underneath the clothing. It shows you where those folds should be. It kind of gives you that realistic look. So, or that, not necessarily realistic. I don't mean like realistic as in style. I mean realistic as in it makes sense. It's cohesive. And it makes your artwork seem like you planned it out. Like things are being done on purpose. As opposed to, you know, it doesn't quite look right because you didn't just take those extra couple seconds to do a quick sketch. So, as you see, Miss Piper is now basically completed. And then, of course, you know, I would ink it instead of erasing on pencil, which I hate doing. But you can sort of see as I clean it up here, knowing where everything was really helps to make things look more done and put together and planned out. I hate erasing these legs. We'll just lighten them. And if your character doesn't necessarily wear big fluffy dresses, which, you know, some people don't, you can always, of course, use this as a means to figure out how the clothing would look if it's skin tight. It does help. It definitely does help knowing the anatomy of your character. I don't want to say to know anatomy, because I mean that's just common sense, but to know the anatomy of your character and where everything falls based on that anatomy. So yeah, touch up a few things here, and then her chin, darken in those eyes because she's adorable. There we go. And this is basically how I do it, guys. There's really no logic. It's just honestly practicing over and over again and figuring out what it is, and basically figuring out with your style how it is you want to do things. And that comes with, you know, experimentation. That comes with just practice, research, because you can look at other people's styles and you could definitely learn from how they're doing things. You can learn how to do things more simple than you're trying to do, or you could figure out how to do things more complex than what you're doing. It just depends on what your ultimate goal is. So don't think that there's any one way to do anything. Figuring it out, that's all part of like being an artist. That's all part of, you know, well, basically that's it. It's just all part of being an artist. I guess there's really no other better way to word it other than that. But yeah, that's how I do it, guys. In particular, I know that at this point, like if you're coming into the video at this point, it's like, oh, it's already done. It's like, yeah, it is. But the under part is the best part. I don't get super detailed into my anatomy before I put the clothes over it. It's unnecessary if I already know it's going to be covered. But having a basic understanding, even here with Piper, there's a basic understanding because of how I drew my shapes, because I know how her body works. I know that there's a second breast over here. I know that there's a rib cage here. I know that this is where her waist is going to be. I know that this is where her hips are. So I know that this right here becomes one whole, and her abdomen is here. I know her belly button's here. Like, all of those details come into play. But the more you break it down into simple shapes, the easier anatomy will become for you. I feel like a lot of new artists tend to over detail their anatomy over top of what they're doing, and that's kind of where they start to have these struggles, is they're trying to fit in all this anatomical information that they could actually simplify. It's not wrong and it's not right, but if you're finding you're getting frustrated with detail in particular, or trying to fit all these details into your anatomy, keep in mind you can always step back from that. You can do a simpler way of or you can do a simpler style. Sometimes taking a break from those very detailed artistic forms of anatomy helps you to develop your own style, and then you can go back and add the details later. I used to be incredibly detailed with my anatomy. I used to try to emulate people like Mike Turner, who tends to have a lot of muscle lines and things like that in his work. Had, I should say, rest in peace, had all that stuff. And I used to try to cross hatch, and then it's like, okay, now I have to put clothes over it. I just wasted all that time putting all these muscle marks, all this cross hatching, all this shading, all this perfectly placed, anatomical information that I just ended up covering up. So understand that knowing where that stuff is important as a basic anatomy tool, but don't lament and don't get caught up on doing all of that work, especially if you're going to cover it. I keep things simple. I learn how I want my anatomy for the character to look. I figure out how I want their particular positions to be in their poses, to correlate with their particular personalities, and then I go from there. I keep it simple. If I want to get more detailed, I always can later on. And I think I've repeated myself like 8 times now, so I think I'm going to go ahead and end this video. This is just kind of a little informative thing. It's not, again, like this is how you guys should always do it. No, the way you should do it is the way you feel comfortable, but understand that you have to have a basic understanding of actual proportions, which I do for my character. I know it doesn't look like it because I keep going back and forth on 4, but this is how I measure. Is I just do rough finger measures. 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4.5. I still say 4.5, even though like when I sketched it out over here I said 5. But the more you draw a character and the more intimate you are with that character, the more you'll understand about that character, and then you won't need guides all the time to work on that character. But yeah, that's it for me, guys. Just keep drawing, keep practicing, and I promise you're going to get there. Nobody becomes an artist overnight. Nobody is that good. Trust me, I know. I've tried. Anyway, so thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys in the next video.